Okay, this chapter is now on religion, ethics, and climate change. Mary Evelyn Tucker, a forum on religion ecology at Yale University. I'm obviously not an expert on this, but we'll use this as a placeholder for the completion of representing the whole book. Plus, this course is supposed to be for everybody, so can I read it, understand it, and translate enough of the good ideas to everybody? That's a test for myself. The questions raised in the chapter are: is climate change not a moral challenge? We talked about climate change as an issue of power, as a problem that needs integrated solutions, as something that traverses natural system and affects disproportionately some vulnerable populations. So it's a issue of poverty and rights and justice as well. Who will suffer most from the effects of climate change? We have talked about how the richest 10% emit 50% of the greenhouse gases. We will look at that again. And the bottom 3 billion are not at all seriously involved in producing the emissions, but they pay a heavy price. Their vulnerability to climate change impacts is very high. Do we have at present an environmental ethics that is broad enough and inclusive enough to respond, especially to the needs of the poor? Okay, so we'll talk again about the disproportionate impacts and what that means in the context of religion and ethical values. If nature is not fully valued, how can we develop a robust environmental ethics? These are new fields, so the argument here is that the religions themselves have to start considering ethics of climate change in their discourse. Okay, climate change is not yet an ethical challenge. What does that mean? Big problems in the past, like abolition, or let's say the independence movement of India, led by Mahatma Gandhi, and the civil rights movement led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., were all about crossing the threshold of the broad sense that they are ethical and moral problems. Here is a quote from Drescher about econicide, which is basically suicides for economical causes. Perhaps the true indicators are the forces that successfully challenged the slave system and forced it to turn the corner towards contradiction and destruction should not be sought in the elites of trade and parliament, but in the regional and local networks of social and religious life. So social and religious networks began to elevate the slavery to be a ethical and moral problem. Mahatma Gandhi believed that even one person can make a difference. Strength comes not from physical capacity, but from an indomitable will. So you have to find agency, the capacity and the autonomy to act as a person by being part of this movement, given a just cause, non-violence, and capacity for self-suffering and fearlessness. Victory is certain. Without violence, victory can be attained if there is fearlessness and the cause is just. Okay, Mahatma Gandhi asserted, we only wish to serve our fellow men wherever we may be. Okay, and these kind of leaderships we talked about before as values that enable people's agency in the cause and enable action, sustained action. The moral dimensions of the civil rights movement. This is a paper from this source here at the bottom. Father Theodore M. Hesburgh, president of the University of Notre Dame, presented the communication at the stated meeting on November 10, 1964, under the title The Moral Dimension of the Civil Rights Movement. He pointed out that the concern for civil rights is not just another economic, political, social, or ethnic movement, but there is a deep moral dimension which is its most fundamental aspect, and without which the movement will never be completely understood completely successfully. So this was in the middle of the civil rights itself. The civil rights went from the 50s to the end of the 60s, and you can see that in the middle of the movement itself there were these debates and there was these epiphanies, if you will, about how the moral dimension of the civil rights movement was needed to completely understand the cause, the direction, and the motivation for such a movement. So, can climate change take such a moral dimension? We will see that it is getting there. There are several movements at several levels, including religious institutions, which are beginning to address climate change as an issue of rights, justice, morality, and ethics. Okay, and there are several codified codes of conduct for national and international levels, which are probably going to push this over to that level of requiring ethical and moral considerations for dealing with climate change for the poor and also for nature. Nature itself needs our consideration. What are the rights of Mother Nature? These also will come up a little bit in this context. Hopefully this will happen before it's too late. Some people would argue it's already too late in terms of the impacts. Nonetheless, we are on a track, so the question is, how will religion help in this effort to solve climate change? We'll come back to mitigation and technological cluster again, but these are the social transformations that must happen along the way.